Alright, guys, so welcome back to the traditional channel. This is going to be lecture number 11 Legacies of the Revolution, Right to Left. The political polarizing influence of the French Revolution set up the spectrum of political views in Europe for the rest of the 19th century. On the right were supporters of royalism and the traditional power of the church. On the left were anarchists and socialists. Liberal Republicans supporting popular sovereignty and individual liberty, but with strong property rights and a growing capitalist economy, were in the middle. In this lecture, we will explore powerful thinkers on the right and the left who helped create a more extreme conservatism and anarchist socialism that lasted throughout the century. The right. In addition to Burke's other conservative responses to the revolution, including those of the French theocratic counter-revolutionaries Louis-Philippe Robert de la Mayenne and Louis Gabriel Ambroise de Bonald were religious traditionalists supporting ultramontanism, that is, acceptance of the superior political authority of the Pope and a restoration of the revolutionary authority of the Catholic Church. Lamennais insisted that the state cannot be indifferent to matters of religion and that the Vatican must have some authority over the state because religion is essential to right political order. Perhaps the most striking conservatism came from Joseph-Marie Comte de Maistre. Early on, Maistre was sympathetic with progressive reform, but by 1789 he had come to support the restoration of the monarchy and a balance of power among the traditional estates. Maistre's reasoning for his conservatism was far more radical than Burke's. For him, all nature is evil and drenched in blood. Humans, like other animals, must kill to live. Man can be controlled and made tolerable only by submission of his soul to God and his body to the state, which rules by force and power. Power is ultimately from God, and when humans alter his plan, as in the revolution, it can only generate terrible adverse consequences such as the terror. For Maistre, the order of the world, which is dictated by an incomprehensible God, is not rational. Man's reason is puny. Nothing important can be based on it. Power, fear, and tradition are in a place for a reason. Human order is impossible without them. This is the counter-enlightenment with a vengeance. Maistre is perhaps the most powerful critic of the reason and its expanded role in human affairs of the 18th century. Still, Maistre believed in the rule of law and in peace, but he insisted that the traditional arrangement in which humans are surrounded by and submit to authority is necessary. Without it, there results a wild and excessive bloodletting the price nature imposes for man slipping the joke. Maistre's practical policy arguments are not far from Burke, but his rhetoric was extreme. It is arguably one of the features of conservatism that, unlike liberalism, it works less on principle than on attachment to history. Conservatism wished to prevent liberal or radical principles from remaking traditional society, but conservatives must differ on what period of society and what kind of society they wish to preserve or return to. As noted, Burke was a conservative of the most liberal modern constitutional monarchy in Europe, but Maistre, Lamennais de Bonald, and other continental conservatives had more purely Asian regime, more elite-driven society to preserve. Along with Bonald and Lamennais, Maistre spoke for a natural conservative constituency encompassing the combined traditional authorities of the king, Catholic Church, and inherited wealth or ruling class. This view would not completely disappear until the second half of the 20th century. The left. Anarchism and socialism emerged during and after the French Revolution. Anarchism is a vision of socioeconomic equality without private owners of capital or without state ownership of the means of production. Long before the French Revolution, Burke, in response to the anti-Church of England writings of Lord Bolingbroke, had published a Vindication of Natural Society, 1756. In it, he argued that if Bolingbroke's arguments against the church were valid, they were equally valid against government itself. The bulk of Burke's pamphlet rails against government as the source of war, evil, and corruption, but it was satire, as he later admitted. Burke's Vindication was read by William Godwin, the first anarchist of political theory. In his Inquiry Concerning Political Justice, 1793, Godwin agrees with Burke's tongue-in-cheek arguments against the state. Godwin is generally utilitarian or consequentialist, meaning that the ultimate moral rule is to promote the good of society. Like several other Enlightenment thinkers, he believed in the perfectibility of humankind. but the moral goodness of any act's contribution to society can come only from the free decisions of the individual in response to his or her own reason. A commanded person's acts reflects no moral goodness. Thus, all political control undermines society's moral life. Godwin asks that all greatest evils in human life come from government, including war and material inequality, because government mainly serves to protect the property of the rich. Without government, men would be equal and capable of the moral improvement that is the whole purpose of our existence. Human reason alone is sufficient to the guidance of human cooperation and conduct. Godwin's views also mean rejection of marriage and established religion, any moral institution enforced by positive law, that is, a law made by man, not by God. Moral individualism is the key for Godwin. Individual self-sufficiency and moral self-direction of independent farmers is the ideal society. Godwin also rejects the social contract. Partially is immoral. Universally benevolence towards all is the irrational moral law. Godwin was not a violent revolutionary. He expected that government would inevitably wither away as man improved through egalitarian, free self-decision. This is how anarchism and socialism began as a kind of utopianism. The French Pierre-Joseph Proudhon was the first to call himself an anarchist. In his What is Property, 1840, Proudhon says that property is theft and homicide. It is completely incompatible with the equal natural rights of man and hence is self-contradictory. Proudhon distinguishes property from the mere possession, meaning the act of occupying a piece of land or using tools that produce what one's family needs. He recognizes the rights of living persons to live and work and have possessions. However, the alleged property right, understood as right to do whatever one wishes with the property, is wrong and unjust and makes for an irrational, unequal system of society. Anything over which claims absolute dominion is wrong. There is no right to property, nor can there be. If they were, then property taxes would be wrong. Further, no right can go beyond death, which means that passing on a property right makes no sense. Why should right to a property entail a right to profit from it, thereby inventing new value out of nothing? It is all intrinsically unjust. Early socialism. In political economy, virtually all anarchists are socialists, but they refuse to state socialism, that is, state ownership of the means of production. Some early socialists were not anarchists, but not quite state socialists either. Robert Owen, Charles Fourier, Louis Blanc, and Henry de Saint-Simon all tried to justify and establish small, decentralized worker-controlled business towns with a high level of equality and joint ownership of profits, but not necessarily completely equality. Each tried to work out a vision of society as small and decentralized. They criticized rent, interest, wages, and profit, all of which they believed created large differences in wealth and made one man dependent on another. They did not all reject property in the sense of personal possessions, the family home, and the tools of the trade. The justification is highly moralistic and based in natural law. Each individual is the judge of right and wrong and can live a moral and religious life before God only if economically independent and the sole judge of his own or her own life. In effect, in the mid-19th century and even later, a host of reforms was called socialist. Trade unions, profit sharing, stock ownership by workers, anything that put the means of production to some extent into the workers' hands. International spectrum from left to right. The consistent locus of revolutionary activity in the 19th century Europe was France. After the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, the Bourbon monarch was restored in the person of Louis XVIII, later succeeded by his brother Charles X. The liberal July Revolution of 1830 overthrew Charles and installed a constitutional monarchy somewhat like that of England under Louis-Philippe, another Bourbon. The revolution and his aftermath, the Napoleonic War, set up the international spectrum of conservatism on the right, some kind of socialism on the left, and a mix of liberal and civic republicanism in the middle. Then, in 1848, came a widespread international revolt in the German states, Austria, Hungary, Poland, and many other countries, in which socialism and a fear of workers' revolt played a role in Paris. This ended in the election of Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte to the presidency of the Second French Republic. He declared himself Emperor Napoleon III in an 1851 coup. The 1870 revolt brought the abdication of Louis Napoleon and the Paris Workers' Commune of 1871. where a red socialist flag flew for 2 months. After extensive fighting in the working class areas of Paris, the Commune was brutally put down. Eventually, the Third French Republic was installed, which lasted until the Nazi occupation of 1940. State socialism in the form of Marxism ultimately won out as the anti-capitalist, anti-clerical party in most countries, but anarchists remain here and there, especially among Russians, including Mikhail Bakunin and Pyotr Kropotkin. The most famous socialist anarchist would be explicitly religious, although still anti-church, that is the great Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy, author of War and Peace and Anna Karenina. Tolstoy anarchist pacifism is fully described in The Kingdom of God is Within You. The basis of his thought is a rationalist interpretation of Christianity. No act of violence is legitimate, even in self-defense, because violent action is always evil. But states and churches are worldly organizations built on exclusion and violence. They are immoral in principle. States send innocent strangers to kill innocent strangers on the basis of patriotic lies, and churches stand by or bless the war effort. Tolstoy's pacifism drives him all the way to anarchism. Eventually, we will see a non-pacifist and even violent anarchism. The Russian Bakunin began to rhapsodize violence, and the Frenchman Georges Sorel endorses a violent anarcho-syndicalism with a power devolving to labor unions. The propaganda of the deed, as it was called, led the assassination. Thus, the term anarchist in the 20th century will come to mean something like a renegade socialist without a party. So guys, I really hope you liked this video. Let me know if you liked it. Give any comments, any feedback, and goodbye.